Hello everybody, this is Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-minute histories videos. And in the weird world of COVID that we're in, we are heading into Preakness weekend in early October, so I thought I'd borrow a Preakness term. And today we're going to have a trifecta. We're not only going to talk about Hackerman House behind me, but we're going to talk about two of Baltimore Heritage's 2020 award winners, Doors Open Baltimore and Charlie Duff. Doors Open Baltimore for bringing people out each year to dozens of great historic places around the city, and Charlie Duff for his still new book, The North Atlantic Cities. What I thought both of those have in common is that they help us understand our history, but also how our history is continuing to impact the way Baltimore is today. So we better get going. We got 3 things to cover, and we better get going pretty lickety-split here. All right, the house behind me is really big, but it maybe has an even bigger name. It is the Thomas-Jencks-Gladding-Hackerman House at the Walters Art Museum, or something like that. So let's peel back layers of history there and see what we can find. The first owner, the builder, was John Hanson Thomas. He was the great-grandson of America's first president. And I know you George Washington fans are scowling at me. Maybe George himself up to my right is scowling at me. And Hanson, a Marylander, was president of the Continental Congress. We hadn't gotten around to adopting the Constitution yet and our 3 branches of government, but he was the first person to be called president in our new America. So there you go. The house is really grand. It has 22 rooms. It included a library, a conservatory, a secret chamber, and a terrapin pool. If you wanted to impress your guests for dinner, and back then in Maryland, you had terrapin soup. If you were wealthy, you sent your cook down to the harbor to get fresh terrapins that morning. But if you were really wealthy, like Thomas was, you built a terrapin pool in your basement where you kept the turtles all year round, and your cook would go down just an hour or 2 before dinner, and your terrapin soup would be about as fresh as you could possibly get. So that's the kind of household he kept. He lived here with his wife, 7 kids, a French governess, 4 free African-American servants, and at least 2 enslaved servants. And let's talk about one of those, which is kind of a neat story. Her name was Sibby Grant, and a few years ago, Baltimore Heritage, we were part of a group that more or less sort of unearthed a letter from her to her quote-unquote master, Thomas, who was a Southern sympathizer and spent most of the Civil War in Fort McHenry in jail. And this is a letter from her to him, which in itself is pretty extraordinary. It was illegal to teach enslaved people to read and write back then. And here's a letter from an enslaved cook who was very literate. So that in and of itself is unusual. What's also unusual is she starts the letter, "Dear friend." Imagine that, an enslaved person writing to her master as "dear friend." All sorts of speculation and intrigue around what that means. But we found this letter. We were working with the Baltimore School for the Arts and a class there, and the students felt that they should share this with the Walters Art Museum, and they did. And the Walters Art Museum really embraced it. And when we get to this chapter in our history, just 2 years ago, when the newly refurbished house has its grand opening, the Walters really embraces and showcases Sibby Grant's story and the story of other enslaved folks and servants in this house behind me. So kind of neat there. The house is owned by the Thomas family until the 1890s, when the Jencks family, Francis Jencks and his wife Elizabeth, buy it. He is a very wealthy New York banker coming down here to relocate and continue his banking. And it's under him and really his wife Elizabeth that the house gets refurbished. The grand central stair, the spiral stair, gets enlarged, and a Tiffany glass light gets put above it. Elizabeth hires her younger brother, George Platt, to do the work, who works with a local architect here. You might not know Platt's name, but you know at least one of his other works. He was the person who designed the Freer Gallery at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. They continue the tradition of having lavish parties. The Thomases had parties that included the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII. The Jencks had parties with presidents and senators, and did fabulously on that count. They continue in the house until about the 1950s, when Elizabeth dies, and for 10 years it sits more or less vacant and certainly uncared for. And in steps Harry Gladding, and you might know that name, those of you of a certain generation, Gladding Chevrolet. I think he had one in Glen Burnie and one up by the Valley Inn off of Falls Road. And Gladding and his partner Timmy bought the house in 1963 and did a wonderful job restoring it back to its glory days of the Thomases and the Jencks. We covered that a little bit in an earlier video on LGBTQ heritage. And although we don't have hard evidence, I am pretty sure that Gladding buying this house with his front yard as Mount Vernon Place at a time when the police were harassing members of the LGBTQ community just for talking and meeting there, I think that he was making more than a little bit of a statement. And he, of course, continued the tradition of having lavish parties. When he got a little bit too old to care for it, the building sat vacant for a number of years, and in steps Willard Hackerman. And Willard Hackerman, the construction executive, buys the house, and in a sort of, I don't know if flamboyant is the right word, but dramatic event, he walks into the mayor's office, Baltimore's mayor, Mayor Schaefer, drops a set of keys on his desk and says, well, Mayor, here you have a present. Here, Hackerman, or 1 West Mount Vernon Place is yours. Schaefer embraces that and says, all right, now we got to find a use, and has a contest for what use should go in. And the Walters Art Museum wins. And today it is part of the Walters Art Museum. And as I mentioned earlier, just a year or so ago, a grand opening after another fabulous restoration work. I encourage you to go in there and take a look when we can. But more immediately, this house is part of this year's Doors Open annual event. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Doors Open. Say congratulations again to Margaret De Arcangelis, the board chair of the Baltimore Architecture Foundation, as well as the Baltimore American Institute of Architects Baltimore chapter, and the dozens and dozens of volunteers who make this event happen each year. If you don't know about it or you haven't been on it, each year for the past 5 or 6 years, the Doors Open crew has worked with property owners to literally open their doors so that we, the public, can go in and see wonderful historic places that we might not otherwise be able to see. Places in the past have included the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge, the Peel Museum, the Schuler School of Fine Arts, places like that. Really, really great. So congratulations again. And let me just mention that this year, Doors Open is going virtual. They're not doing in person, of course, but they have a wonderful set of events in October online that you can check out, including a virtual tour of 1 West Mount Vernon Place, the Hackerman House. So tune back into that. We'll get you a link for that, and you can learn a ton more about this wonderful building. All right, the second award winner is Charlie Duff, who is a local historian for many years. Many of us have heard him and his wonderful talks, and his award is for his book, The North Atlantic Cities. If you haven't read it, I think you should. I think it should be required reading for all Baltimoreans. And in it, he explains not only the history of Baltimore, but how we got to be a row house city, why we are like places like Amsterdam and London and Dublin, and maybe not like places like Paris, which is an apartment city. And in his book, he provides just incredible insight into not only the past, but how that shapes our planning for things like transportation and parks and economic development. It is a work that it took years of research and study, but I think it really is a work that embodies a lifetime of Charlie's learning about, working in, and shaping cities and communities in Baltimore. So we'll put a link for where you can get that. Congratulations, Charlie, and congratulations, Doors Open. And with that, we'll say goodbye and see you next time.